Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 24 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first I would like to talk with you about the situation in Kiev, because the recent pictures that we received from the territory shown us that the situation with air defense in the capital of Ukraine is very difficult, and telling the truth, there is no air defense at all. Almost every single day we got another video of how the significant number of Russian drones of Ukrainian types are flying above the capital without any resistance from the Ukrainian side, without any missile launched by the Ukrainian air defense or something like this. For example, this is one of the video. A drone was flying above the residential area without any risk, without any resistance from the Ukrainian side. In this video we can see another Ukrainian drone that was flying above the capital of Ukraine. The Ukrainians tried to bring this drone down, but they missed, and after that no more attempts, nothing more. And you know that this is very interesting because the Russians managed to improve their drones significantly since the beginning of autumn of 2024. For these purposes, let's increase the numbers of updates at least for 1 month, and I would like to show you this video. This video we got on the 27th of October, and in this video we can see the Russian drone, Ukrainian drone, that was flying above the territory of Sumy region. And as you can see, this Russian drone has a camera, and as I understand, the Russians decided to improve their drones, and in the beginning of the special military operation, first the Russians tasked every drone to attack this or that territory at the beginning of launching process. But as for the late 2024, the Russians are sending drones without tasking them. They are sending them, and then the operator can see from the camera, or when the camera recognizes something important, the operator of drone can change and to task the drone for another target. So this is the most important, that I believe that currently the Russians drones above the capital Ukraine, first of all, is the sign and a message to Zelensky that anytime these drones, if they recognize you or somebody very important, they can change target and to attack anybody on the territory of Kiev. Not just air defense systems, not just different plants and different military objects, but anything, and the most important, anybody. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first let's talk about the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And today we got the video from the village of Maximovka, very important video. And in this episode we can see the Russian flag that was raised in the most northern part of the settlement. And this video confirms that the Russians, as a result of clashes, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Maximovka. This is very important progress, because now the Russians have no settlements, no barriers, nothing in front of them before moving further in the northern direction towards the settlements of Konstantinopol, Ulaki, and Sukhi Yali. The situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult, and we see that the Ukrainians, since the beginning of the Russian great South Donetsk offensive operation, haven't managed to stabilize this area. Let's take a look at how the Russian offensive was developing since the 25th of October. For example, this is the situation on the 25th of October. The Russians were very far from the current lines, and almost every single day starting from the 25th of October we got more and more updates, more and more gains, more and more let's say advances of the armed force of Russian Federation exactly in the southern direction. The Ukrainians were completely defeated. Their defense lines of the armed force of Ukraine have collapsed, and nobody knows for sure obviously where exactly the Ukrainians are planning or are going to stabilize the situation and to slow the Russians down. Most of the military experts came to conclusion that most likely the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this territory, and they will give up these territories in Russian favor. And now let's move further, and let's move to the area of responsibilities of the group of forces south. This is the line between Yelizavetovka and Kurakhova itself, and we got additional changes on the ground. There was a very long operational pause, we can say, in comparison with the areas of responsibilities of the group of forces east and the center. While these two groups were moving, the group of forces east and center, the group of forces south were standing on their own positions. And starting off today, we start receiving additional updates of additional progress of the armed force of Russian Federation in the village of Antonovka. These are the changes on the ground during the previous 24 hours. So the Russians are moving very slowly, but the Russians are moving. The same story we can see on the territory to the south of Maximovka. According to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions along this river Balka-Dolga. This is a very small river, and for example, these reports we got yesterday from neutral mappers on the 2nd of November, and today on the 3rd of November this information also was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian mappers. The pincers around Kurakhova are tightening, obviously. Now let's talk about the northern flank, the area of responsibilities of the group of forces north and center. And today, yesterday on the 2nd of November, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation, when published another report, confirmed Russian complete control over the village by the name of Kurakhovka. There are still some doubts about the village of Vovchenka and these landfills and these facilities. Obviously, the Russians are moving, and today we got additional confirmation from Ukrainian mappers that the Russians are pushing, but according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the western part of the village of Vovchenka along the Yakova-Sverdlova Street still remains under Ukrainian control. As for the eastern part, this territory is under complete Russian control. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for Stepanovka, Ilinka, and Berestki. The Russians are trying to push and to force the Ukrainians to fall back, and I'll remind you that on the 1st and on the 2nd of November, we got reports that both villages were captured by the Russians, but for the previous 2 days we haven't received anything that can confirm this. Now let's move further and let's talk about the situation around the Kremenная Balka Novodmitrievka. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions, and now the Russians are moving further. We got several videos. For example, in this video that was published on the 2nd of November, we can see the Ukrainian artillery strikes, and the author of this video reported that we can see the artillery strikes on Russian positions. And for example, the most important moment is this one. There is one artillery strike in the field, and this artillery strike was geolocated exactly in this point. Based on this video, most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor, at least between Kremenная Balka and Novodmitrievka. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the city of Selidova, because as I understand, the most important updates currently are coming from here, because all attacks, all activities from the Russian side in this direction are unexpected to the Ukrainians. These attacks doesn't have any goal like to attack in the direction of Pokrovsk. These are just disturbing attacks to force the Ukrainians to use their operational reserves in this area and not allow the Ukrainians to use their forces somewhere in the area of Kurakhova. The thing is that the Russians during the previous 48 hours, 72 hours attacked a significant number of objects, military objects, vehicles in this direction. Let's increase, for example, the number of updates since the 1st of November, and we're gonna count more than 10 geolocated cases of Russian attacks. There are much more cases, much more videos. Most of them it's very impossible to geolocate, but those that were geolocated were added on map, and we see that the Russian focus, after withdrawn focus, lays between the villages of Vishnyovo, Yurivka, Petrivka, further in the northwestern directions towards Novostrivsky. We've been discussing the situation for several days, and we discussed that most likely the Russians are planning to move in the northwestern direction. And as I understand, the first Russian goal, the first Russian target is to reach these water reservoirs. This was the Lake of Salona and the river Balka Sukha. So most likely the Russians are planning the first stage of this offensive operation, the storming operations, is the first goal is to take under control everything that lays inside of this red line. If the Russians are able to force the Ukrainians to fall back, first of all, this will allow the Russians to secure the city of Selidova. The thing is that the city of Selidova wasn't damaged at all during the battle for the settlement, and we can say that probably just 15-20% of buildings were damaged or destroyed. The majority of the buildings are safe and nothing happened with them. So that means that the Russians can concentrate significant number of forces, and even civilians can return back on the territory of the settlement, which will allow the Russians to build necessary infrastructure, including hospitals, including the places where the Russian forces can be deployed, and then to move further in the northwestern direction or just in the western direction towards the settlement by the name of Andreevka. As for this direction, this is the key region, because who controls Andreevka, who controls this agglomeration of small villages like Andreevka, Konstantinopol, or Ulakli, can control the entire South Donetsk direction. So currently, this is the key region, and the Russians are trying to get here as close as possible, both from the southern direction and from the northeastern direction. Now let's move further. Once again, since the beginning of November, we got this significant number of FPV drone attacks. We remember the pattern. If we see the Russian drones, that means that the Russians are moving in the same direction. Now let's talk about the city of Donetsk. And during the previous months, probably in the late October, we were coloring this Zabalka district back in Ukrainian favor, and starting of the 2nd, 3rd of October, we start coloring this Zabalka district back in Russian favor. So it's very difficult to understand what exactly is happening on the territory of this district of the city of Donetsk, but obviously there are very heavy clashes. Some sources reported that the Russians were defeated and were forced to fall back from this Zabalka district. Maybe the Russians now counterattack and trying to restore control over the settlement. Very difficult to understand, but we have a lot of geolocations that confirm Russian progress in the eastern part of the settlement of this district. This is the situation on the ground by the end of the 2nd of November, and this is the situation on the ground by the beginning of the 3rd of November. Now let's talk about the city of Chasiv Yar. There are very interesting updates. Since the beginning of November, the Russians intensified their aviation, artillery, and drone activities. The Russians are bombing the strongholds and the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine with the 12 flamethrower systems, with FAPs, with everything they have, and all these attacks, everything that is coming from this territory, tell us that most likely the Russians are about to begin the final battle for the citadel and for the city of Chasiv Yar itself. And today we can say, we can't call it like a strong evidence, but it's obviously something that tells us that something big is going to happen in this area very soon. Today, the pro-Russian resources published a video of Russian drones flying above the strongholds of the armored forces of Ukraine on the territory of the forest in the southern part of the city of Chasiv Yar. And here we can see how the Russians are dropping some papers, some leaflets, suggesting and proposing the Ukrainians to surrender. We used to see something like this on the territory of the city of Ugledar and in the southern parts of Katerinovka. The Russians, before the beginning of their final assault on those two areas, first sent drones and dropped these papers, applications suggesting the Ukrainians to surrender. So most likely during the next 48 hours, the Russians will begin their full-scale offensive operation in direction of the city of Chasiv Yar, with the purpose to defeat the Ukrainians completely and to open the road for further advance in the direction of Konstantinovka and in the direction of Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. Now let's talk about Siversk. After a very long operational pause, after very long different reports from both sides, as I understand, the Siversk direction began breathing. At least we have adjustments and updates from the southern direction. Just yesterday we got the video of how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions using the 12 flamethrower systems, the company stronghold to the north of the village by the name of Ivanodarivka. In this video we can see several attacks on Ukrainian positions. The Russians, that was something like artillery preparation. And today, on the 3rd of November, we got the video of how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian positions in the same area with a significant number of armored vehicles, personnel carriers. Currently, we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to improve their positions to take under control this territory, but obviously the attempt was really powerful and the Russians were using the significant number of forces. And we know the current status of the Ukrainians, what can they do and what they can't do. And telling the truth, most likely during the next few days, I believe we're going to receive updates that will give us the right to adjust the map, this part below the red line, behind in Russian favor. So that was an attack to break through defense. And let's wait for additional updates. Maybe we're going to receive some. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the city of Siversk. And just yesterday, the Ukrainians published the photo from the western part of the settlement with the Ukrainian flag. So we don't know for sure what exactly is happening along the Seversky Donetsk River. Obviously, there are very heavy clashes. Anyway, let's wait for additional updates because this is very important territory. Furthermore, we have another video from the village of Zakitne. And in this video, we can see the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, discovered the Ukrainian bridge and destroyed it as a result of missile strike. And the Ukrainians were using this bridge for communications between the Liman direction and the Siversk direction. So this is very important logistic road that was destroyed. Obviously, the Russians are trying to ruin the logistic of Siversk before or during the offensive operation. Now let's move further and let's talk about the southern Kupiansk direction, where the Russians continue advancing along the river of Zherebets. And during the previous, since the beginning of November, we got several changes on the ground. For example, this is the situation on the 31st of October. This is on the 1st of November. The Russians secured the farms in the village of Terney. This is on the 2nd of November. The Russians improved their positions along the tree lines, and this is on the 3rd of November. The Russians entered the forest with its title with the nickname of Gloves. It's like strategical nickname for this forest. The Russians are moving, and probably there are just several days left for the Ukrainian foothold in this area. Now let's move and let's talk about the northern Kupiansk direction, where the Russians also resumed their full-scale offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Let's discuss the situation in this area probably from the 29th of October. Minister of Defense of Russian Federation several days ago reported that the Russians managed to take under control the village of Kruglakovka completely and to secure this territory. Other Russian sources reported about very heavy clashes in the village of Pershatravnevo, which was remained by the Ukrainians in the village of Stepy. So the Russians were attacking, and we see that the Russians also were using pincers, let's say tactics to attack, trying to encircle those Ukrainians that were located in the fields between the village of Berestova, Novoselovka, and Pishane the north. So the Russians began moving, and we started receiving updates, huge advances on the 30th of October. The Minister of Defense reported complete control over the Kruglakovka. On the 31st of October, the Russians managed to reach the line of the village of Lazova, trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back because there were very big risk of being encircled by the Russians among these fields. This is the area of responsibilities of the 77th Air Mobile Brigade. On the 1st of November, there were no updates, but on the 2nd of November, the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported about complete control over the village of Stepy or Pershatravnevo, and that the village of Kopanki is in the gray zone. Furthermore, the Russians managed to take under control additional tree line that made the presence of the armed forces of Ukraine in these fields impossible. And on the night between the 2nd and the 3rd of November, the Ukrainians evacuated most of their personnel from this cauldron towards the village of Novokruglakovka and towards the village of Lazova. And today, different mappers reported that the Russians managed to secure this pocket completely. So the situation for the Ukrainians is critical, and the biggest problem for the Ukrainians is that the Russians are widening and maintaining their foothold in this area, allowing to concentrate more and more forces in this direction, and when the Russians reach the critical level, they will be able to attack in any direction. Now let's talk about the city of Ovchansk, and we have lots of important updates. The Russians managed to take under control the central citadel. Now the Russians have no problems to move further in the southeastern direction with the purpose to reach the Vovcha River during the next several days. So I believe that by the end of the year, the northern part of Volchansk would be secured by the Russians, and then the Russians will be able to cross the river and to begin the battle for northern Volchansk. As for the 3rd of November, today we got the video of how the Russians were continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in the southern part of Ovchansk, trying to destroy the temporary deployment points of the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's talk about the Sudzha direction, where the Russians continue clearing and destroying the first cauldron they created several days ago. I'll remind you that a week ago, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russian Federation, reported that the Russian army, as a result of clashes, managed to capture up to 2,000 soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine exactly in this pocket. 2,000 soldiers were captured, and we were waiting when the Russians are planning to begin their cleanup operation. And starting of November, the Russians began destroying the Ukrainian positions in this area. First, we got reports of Russian attack towards the forest. The Russians managed to land infantry in this territory and advance a little bit in the forest with the purpose to reach as close as possible to the village by the name of Novaya Sorochina, with the purpose to cut the Ukrainians in this part. The next day we got another video. On the 2nd of November we got the video of another Russian attack on the line Novoselovka-Pogribki. For example, in this video we can see how the Russian BMP was attacking the edge Ukraine positions, which confirms that most likely everything to the north of this BMP position was already captured by the Russians. And so this is adjustments on map on the 22nd of November. And on the 3rd of November, different mappers, including pro-Ukrainians, reported that the forest and these tree lines and so on to the northwest of this small agglomeration was captured by the Russians. We're talking about these territories. So the first piece of pie of the Suji direction, the Russians began to cleaning it. So let's wait for additional updates. We still haven't seen North Korean forces on the ground. The president elections of the United States of America are going to start very, very soon. So probably the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th of November are going to be very, very hot. And that's it for this video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.